Hi, welcome back. This is Dr. Burton, and this is part 3 of my argument for God from Logos. Last time we went over, let me get to it here. We went over an argument that, let's see, we're trying to support the minor premise of this argument. And the argument was that it's not the case that reason is ontological and there is no God, silence. So we wanted to establish that reason is ontological. Now we're trying to get a second argument here. Remember when I was talking about dualism and idealism and I said I needed to fill more in? Well, I did. I filled more in down here. So the second argument is going to be an argument that if reason is ontological, then Christianity is true. This may be controversial, so hang on, let's look at it. Okay, so again, we have a major premise and a minor premise. And let's look at this. Major premise, reason is ontological. If reason is ontological, then something must be eternal. That's what SE means, something is eternal. Minor premise, reason is ontological from the argument that we just went through. We established that reason is ontological from premise 1.1.3. And so here's 2.1. Reason is ontological. If reason is ontological, then either none is eternal, NE, or some is eternal, SE. Okay, 2.2. It's not the case that nothing is eternal. Okay, I'm getting this argument from Gangadine. If none is eternal, then all is temporal. And if all is temporal, then all had a beginning. That's what temporal means, had a beginning. And if all had a beginning, all came into being. And if all came into being, then being came from non-being. And reason is ontological tells us there is no being from non-being. Why? Being is something that exists. It has attributes. It has qualities, powers. It has the power to be the next moment. Non-being has no existence, no properties, no powers. So that which has no existence, no properties, no powers cannot give rise to that which does exist, has properties, has powers. If you say being came from non-being, then you just made non-being into a being, which is mind-numbing. So no being from non-being. Therefore, something is eternal. Okay? So we had either none is eternal or some is eternal. Now we have something is eternal, but we don't know what that thing is yet. And that thing could be material, has size, and is not conscious, or it can be non-material, conscious, and has no size. Okay, so here's argument 3. Major premise. If reason is ontological, then not material monism. And material monism is all that exists is matter. So from 2.1.3 above. Major premise. Reason is ontological, therefore it's not the case that material monism is true. Now there's other arguments you could bring against material monism, but we're using the argument from Logos. Argument 4. Major premise. If it's not the case that material monism, all that exists is matter, and matter is just one thing, there's nothing else, is eternal, then spirit exists. And the minor premise is, if there's spirit, then spirit is personal being. Why? Spirit is conscious. Consciousness is thinking. It would be self-conscious. It would be a person, personal being. So the conclusion is that there is a personal being, spirit. Major premise. If personal being, then there's no forms. Why? Because forms are not personal. Minor premise, personal being, from argument 4, therefore no forms. So this is another way of arguing against dualism. Again, this is not the only argument there are against material monism and dualism. This is just the argument from Logos. Argument 6. If there's a personal being, then there is a Logos. That is God. Why? Because there has to be something eternal. And now we have an eternal personal being, and this being is God. So major premise, there is personal being, So if something is eternal, then there's a personal being from argument 2 and argument 4. And if there's a personal being, then this being is the ground of logos. Logos is the grounding of reason, is ontological, versus the forms, which are impersonal patterns, and Brahman, which has no distinctions. So here's opening that up a little bit more. Forms is not personal. It's not a spirit. And Brahman all is personal. There's no distinctions because there's no reason is ontological. Sorry about the formatting errors here. Conclusion. Therefore, Logos is God the Creator. Logos is eternal. Why? Because some being is eternal. Reason is the laws of thought and the laws of being. So reason is eternal. And reason is eternal in the Logos. Go back to that first point on the, I took it off, Logos paper number 30. All right, argument number 7, major premise. If reason is ontological, then there's a Logos in me, the laws of thought. Reason is ontological, therefore there's a Logos in me. How do I know that? Because I started this whole paper with reflecting on the self. And it is self-evident that I think, I can't doubt that I think. I could doubt that I'm an individual, but I can't doubt that thinking is happening. If I doubt that I'm thinking about doubting that I'm thinking. So it's self-evident that there's laws of thought, and there's self-evident that there's a thinker. What that thinker is not self-evident, but there is a Logos in me if I'm thinking. Major premise. If reason is ontological, then there's a Logos in the world. Why? Because the world is being. There's laws of being. Reason is ontological. Therefore, the Logos is in the world. Argument 9. If reason is ontological, then there's a fit between Logos in me, my reason, and the world, what I could understand through reason. Minor premise. Reason is ontological. Therefore, there's a fit between Logos in me and Logos in the world. Argument 10. Major premise. If reason is ontological, the Logos is eternal, and the Logos is in me, and the Logos is in the world. Reason is ontological. Therefore, there's a Logos that is eternal, that is in me, and that is in the world. Now, we get to Heraclitus' intuition and to the root of evil in Romans 1:20. The Logos is in me. The Logos is in the world. There is a Logos that is, it's clear. It's clear that the Logos is eternal. We could reason to the fact that we are temporal, that the world is temporal, it's not eternal, and that it's not the case that matter is eternal. It's not the case that dualism, matter and spirit, are co-eternal. It's not the case that spiritual monism, that the one spirit is eternal. And again, those arguments are elsewhere. But it's clear that the Logos is eternal. So the Logos is in me and the Logos in the world leads to the idea that it's clear that the Logos is eternal. And again, this is what the first philosophers were looking for, the eternal ground of the Logos. This is what John proposed in his prologue. So here is the hard part. Major premise. If it's clear that the Logos is eternal, then there's no excuse for unbelief. There's no excuse for not seeing the Logos that is all around us. Minor premise. It is clear that the Logos is eternal. Why? Because I just went through this whole long argument showing that it's step by step we could know this. And you have a Logos in you, and there's a Logos in the world, and if you were seeking, you would know. So there's no excuse for unbelief in the Logos. Major premise. If there's no excuse for unbelief, then there's a need for redemption. If we're not using reason, and we ought to be using reason, then there's darkness. And if there's darkness, there's spiritual death, moral evil in the world. And it's without excuse. And if there's suffering in the world. We have to make sense of suffering. Again, this is in Professor Gangadine's book. He deals with the problem of evil, natural evil and moral evil. Moral evil is not using reason to see what is clear. Natural evil is imposed as a callback to get us to stop and think. And it's merciful. And God is just and merciful. And he doesn't leave us to ourselves. There's no excuse for unbelief. There's a need for redemption. That God is both just and merciful points to the necessity for redemption. The necessity for redemption is that we need a word of God written to tell us how God is both just and merciful. How can we be redeemed? Justice says they're not using reason to find meaning. Leave them in that meaningless state. Mercy says call them out of that meaningless state and help them to be restored to the use of reason to find meaning. So there is a need for redemption. The conclusion, there's a need for the word written. Major premise, the word written is the Logos incarnate. I'm sorry, if the word written exists, then it points to the Logos incarnate. Why? Because the word written, starting with Genesis chapter 1, points to the need for redemption. Adam is the first human who failed to do what God commanded him to do, and he brought moral evil into the world, and he brought the consequences, spiritual death. God imposes natural evil as a callback out of that condition, and that needs to be restored. So humans need to be restored from this condition of moral evil and its consequences, and natural evil and its consequences, particularly physical death. So we need to be redeemed. The word written shows how we'll be redeemed. There will be one to come who will undo what Adam did and do what Adam failed to do. He will undo moral evil and natural evil, and he will perfectly obey God and be the one who restores humans to the use of reason, pays the penalty of moral evil in their place. And that's the Logos incarnate. That's the story of Jesus Christ. So there is a word written, and there is a Logos incarnate in that story of redemption. Now, this is Christianity versus Islam and Judaism, mostly because they don't have this element of, Islam does not have vicarious atonement. God's mercy sets aside his justice. So there's a dispute between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism over how God's justice is satisfied. Is it satisfied vicariously through another, through a representative human? Adam represented all of humans. There needs to be a representative man. Now, Judaism has vicarious atonement, but denies that a representative man will come, or that Jesus is that representative. So a lot more can be developed here. The point is that we can get to this conclusion that Logos points to God. Logos points to the Christian God. So this is my argument for God, for the Christian God, from Logos. And it's connected to the handout, Logos paper number 30 and John's prologue. I think each argument is valid. I think it's sound. You may differ, so please point out which premises you think are not sound. Again, I invite you to come to my locals community, kellyburton.locals.com. You can come join us for the discussion there. And thank you for enduring this very detailed argument, long, but I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you will share it, like, subscribe, and share it there. And there's always imperfection, right? I'm always fighting imperfection. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to further conversation with you.